up to me and I'll give you the key. It's easy. Just keep on hopping, keep on rocking, and don't start stopping. Everything you need, just to want to see. And if you want to make it better, you give it to me. I'll embrace it. I believe for you. You wouldn't believe what I see in you. So don't stop. Don't let the drip drop hop. Hold up and make it lovely, make it real, and make it yours. Don't stop.
All right, Joel, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you because you are an expert in all things gut microbiome, which is something I'm a huge fan of. If anybody has listened to this podcast, they know I speak about the gut and how important it is. So I'm super excited to have you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This will be fun.
Yay. So we get to nerd out on all of the fun bugs that go on in the gut. Well, not all, because there's so many, we could never touch on that. But before we get rolling too far, can you tell my listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what got you into this?
Super old. Like pre-Cretaceous era. Just fitness addict from age 5, Jack LaLanne, sprinting 5th grade on the blacktop, trying to get faster. Jumped into the running craze at age 8. That hit the country when I was, this was in the 70s. Then just Olympic lifts became a big deal. In 9th grade, I was super skinny. I was like, I'm almost 6'3", and I was like 164 pounds as a freshman. So I was just embarrassed about how skinny I was. I didn't know what to do, so I would just go to the gym where I was at, and there were all these Olympic athletes that trained there, like Olympic track and field athletes, and they were doing Olympic lifts. So I kind of got into that, and I think I probably stunted my growth because I wound up with really long arms and shorter legs from clean and jerks and all this stuff. So it was kind of something I always did. And then, bodybuilding, hardcore fan, like from an early age, tried everything, tried it all. Really going back to like the early 80s, and a lot of stuff that's popular now actually had a good run 20 plus years ago, 30 plus years ago. So MCTs had a run, keto had a run, all this stuff had a run. So I was just kind of at the forefront as a consumer, just doing everything, trying everything, and had basically the experience. The kind of the long-term view now is that just about everybody I came up with, kind of all the same story. Like that did that thing that you do, that Buddha that you do, and it's always the same story. So it's by the time you're kind of in your late 40s, your body's kind of a wreck. Shoulder, joints, knees, neck, all kinds of issues that you get. Can't drop body fat anymore. Doesn't work when you get into like real life, so like job, having to travel for work, family, kids, all this stuff. And so kind of just really took all that as a consumer and played it out in my life. And my story was just kind of the story everybody will eventually run into, the same story. And it's that that whole system works fantastic when you have time resources. It was born on a beach in Venice, okay? And so it wasn't born in the real world of having a job, being an accountant, working 16 hours. It wasn't born in that world. It was born in a world where you could create an outcome or a look if you had a bunch of time and usually a bunch of drugs to throw at it. And so where that led me to was I was kind of mid-career running a tech startup, and typical story, 16-hour days and and I was really fit. I came into that job like ripped abs and all that, and by the time it was done, I looked like I was auditioning to be a police officer in a donut factory. I was like 260 pounds, and so I think my watershed moment was there were some neighborhood kids that used to like to hang out at our house, and one of them wanted to wrestle me because I was like this big dude. And so we got in a wrestling match, and we got to about like minute 1, and I was like, I just need a minute here. And I was just like, all right. So where that led me to was really rethinking everything that I had done, coming up with something that could work in the real world, and getting hyper real about what really happens over time to most people, because there's a cumulative effect that we'll probably talk about today, and it's never talked about, but there's really a long-term cumulative effect to all this stuff that we do. So we live in this vacuum right now where, you know, somebody will go read some science paper and go, oh my gosh, well, you should do this. And suddenly there's an expert for this thing, it's, you know, fasting, whatever. And they just haven't done it long enough. They haven't actually done it 5-10 years to understand what the long-term effect of that is. And so typically it's really good on the front end and really negative on the back end. You have all kinds of problems from just various different protocols. And there's usually a cumulative cost to all that stuff. So, so that's kind of where I'm at now is, you know, I've kind of played all that out in my life, and really like the focus became for me, what is it that we all really want? At the end of the day, the word is control. You want the power to get your body to do what you want it to do. And that's the thing most people are struggling with. They cannot get their body to do what they want it to do. And the only answer anybody's ever come up with is just throw a massive amount of time at it. That's the solution. But that doesn't work. It doesn't work in real life for most people. So I really started looking at like, well, okay, you know, let's be realistic. We're always going to have these periods where we, quote, get back into it. You know, that's never going to change. We're always going to have the, I just got to get back into it. You know, I got to reallocate energy and time to this thing from other things. Okay. And the older you get, that goes so-so. You know, the more demands on your life, that goes, it's pretty easy to do that when you're younger, but the older you get, it gets much harder and harder to do that. But we're always going to have those periods. But in between those periods, what you really see in real life is this sort of slope of like, you know, like weight gain over time. And it's what you're seeing. And it's not just weight gain, it's the deterioration of the body, it's the aging of the body. And all these things kind of combined. But I really kind of just took a step back and said, well, maybe we could lower the slope in between those times. And, you know, maybe instead of here, we could get it to here. And so you're always going to have that period where you jump back into it, you know, and you knock off a big lump of, you know, whatever body fat, or, you know, you get back in shape. But it's the in-betweens that are killing people, because what you see over time is you see this graph, it's upward, you know, so you see these dips and, oh, I got in shape, but over time, what you're seeing is an upward graph. And so that's kind of a story.
Yeah. So when did you, and I totally side with you on all of this. First of all, like, it's funny how we go through these phases. I've been one of them where it's been like, I've been in top shape of my life, and then I've been out, and then I've been overweight, and then I've been top shape. And it's just like a continuum of, I mean, a body shape in particular is not a linear thing typically anyway, but yeah. I like what you said there about all of that, because it's totally the truth. People see people online that are these fitness people, and they think they're just that way all the time. And for most people, that's not the story. And then you see the other people where they probably have something else influencing it that's not appropriate either. So, you know, with that being said, when did you realize that gut health was a very important part of the body composition equation?
2006. So I was running a startup, and I just left that startup, and I had a couple other startups that I was doing, and they were doing well. And one of them was my passion project. Like, I wanted to just tell the truth. I wanted to tell the truth about like fitness and all this stuff. So I started publishing science articles, and I found most people just didn't care. They didn't really care. They just wanted to lose 5 pounds. That's all they wanted. And so that was kind of like cold water in the face. Nobody really cares about the truth. But one of the discoveries along the way was that there was a Dr. Jeffrey Gordon in 2006 that kind of published what was really the seminal study on the gut biome, and linking it to weight and body composition and aging and all this stuff. And so long story short, what happened to me was I had come down from, I'd started at 257, and then I'd come down mostly really through exercise to about 229. And I'd been in this place now of diet burnout where, you know, at that time I was 43, and I'd done so much dieting over the years that I'd gotten to the end of that, where it's like, you know, all the dieting is going to do is just give me this bounce back. I don't want that. So I was just trying to really just let the exercise do the work. And I was kind of stuck at around 229. Long story short, I did this protocol that was really like focused on feeding the gut biome and feeding substrate into the gut biome. And literally, in fact, I went the other day and I called up the body fat measurement place where, one of those places where they put you in water and sink the whole body in water and measure and stuff. I called them up and got the original document from that. And long story short, I went from 229 to 212 in 7 days and didn't exercise, had no energy to do it, couldn't do it. And I was just ripped to the bone. I was, I think, 6.7% body fat. And, I was at age 43, no drugs, no nothing, just food. And I was like, okay, there's something to this. There's really something here. And that was just really the key differentiator. The way you knew it was working was your poop didn't smell. Like you went from, basically your poop smelled like menthol, smelled like equestrian, like a horse bowel movement. And so just complete recolonization of the gut, my energy skyrocketed. And that really kind of set things rolling for me.
I love that you mentioned that, actually, because that's one of the first questions that I ask my clients when I do new client onboarding. They think I'm this total weirdo because I'm like, how's your poop smell? Like, what do your bowel movements look like? Like, there's a lot of questions. I get pretty personal about that stuff, but it's really, really important. And so what contributes to the fact that that smell happens?
Well, so basically the smell of your poop is dictated by metabolites of very specific taxa of bacteria. And so you have, methane producing bacteria, you have different gases that are produced by bacteria. And so what you tend to find is that when the gut is colonized in a really healthy direction, your poop just doesn't really smell that bad, and if it smells at all. And that's how you know the opposite. So when your poop is just nasty, that's how you know that you have really bad bacteria in the gut, and that's how you know, typically.
So commonly people are like, oh, gut bacteria. The only thing I need to do to take care of my gut is just take a good probiotic, which I have found is not necessarily true.
Yeah, it's probably the worst thing you can do long term. And, I think we all got suckered into the probiotic boom, for a time. That's not to say there aren't beneficial uses to probiotics, but I think that they are best in the hands of people who know what they're doing with those things, because you're playing around with very powerful mediators of human metabolism and human immunity and human health when you're using probiotics. In other words, species of bacteria to shift species in the gut. So there's two ways you can do it. One is through substrate. That's food fasting. Those are ways that you can shift the gut bacteria, and it's really powerful. And it's fast. Like you could literally retune the whole gut, completely change out this taxa in the gut in literally a week. And it's been proven in experiments that it's rapid. Or you can take probiotics, but the problem with that, number one, is where are they going in the gut? Are they in the right place? And are they in the right ratios and the right? There's a lot of nuance to it. It's just not a dumb, simple system. And so that's not to say that you can't have very specific issues and conditions that probiotics, can be life altering for, colitis or Crohn's. And, you can look at bifidobacteria species to help with that, or different strains of things. Those cases certainly exist, but by and large, consuming them like they're chiclets is probably not a great idea.
Absolutely. And I know I find that being a pretty common thing. The other thing is really quality, probiotics they're not cheap. And oftentimes people are deterred by that price tag. So they end up defaulting to something that's a little more on the affordable side. And from what I've found, those are the biggest contributors to a lot of people's gut issues in the first place.
Yeah, I think so. You see a lot of just, it wasn't so common back in 2012, 2013, prior to the probiotic boom. It wasn't so common, but now what you see is that people will change their substrates out, and they're just having massive issues with things. It's because you're fermenting the wrong kind of bacteria in the wrong place, typically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I had a client just recently that is struggling with Sibo. And before we started working on that, she was taking tons of probiotics and things to try to help with the gut problems she was having. And it was actually making it worse. And so one of the very first things we did was pull her off of her probiotic. And within a couple of days, she was getting in touch with me and she was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better.
Yeah, it's one of the worst things you could do. Sibo is kind of like, there's a couple of like healthy syndromes now that we're in the jet wash of. So, right about 2016 is when fasting and the probiotic boom, and fasting, probiotic, keto, and a little bit later carnivore boom kind of happened. And those are essentially fads. And in the jet wash of fads, on the back end, you always have problems. Okay, and so right now those problems are pretty widespread. You see a lot of SIBO, you see a lot of insulin resistance, you see a lot of like issues related to kind of faddish things, and so pretty common.
Yeah. And I want to touch on that a little bit because as I explained to many of my clients, I mean, I have tried everything. I'm pretty sure I've tried everything, but maybe there's something I haven't tried the all carbohydrate diet. Somebody was telling me that the other day and I was like, say what? No way. I'm not like that dumb. But I have tried some things and I've had great successes with some things. But I try to explain to many of my clients or people that I interact with from a day-to-day basis that our body is like a pendulum. If we swing it too hard one way, it's coming back harder the other way. And it's no different with the gut microbiome. We have people doing these like low FODMAP. Yes, they have their place. You have people doing carnivore. You have people doing these things. But at one point, you have bacteria that feeds off of some of these things that are important. And so you can take these diets too far as to where you are actually starving the beneficial factors of your gut as well.
Yeah, I in my book, The Immunity Code, I really tried to hammer this because it sounds like a little thing, but it's actually everything. And it's that homeostasis is the base alloy of health. Okay. In other words, that when you study the body, there's an intricacy that surpasses anything known, anything known, meaning that we need the body needs balance within its systems. And one of the ways you disrupt the homeostasis of the body is to imbalance inputs into the body. When you imbalance your inputs for extended periods, you're going to see imbalances occur. And then imbalance is in the body's systems, or loss of homeostasis anywhere will always have a disease associated to it. It doesn't matter what it is. So when you go sort of off the reservation and go on to the fad sort of thing, what you're going to see almost always is a lot of benefits up front. Half the benefits are just because you made a change. And that's something that's usually left out, is that you would have got the same results with any change, really, for the most part. And the evidence supports that. Like there's a bunch of evidence that shows there's tons of diets and they all work. And the reason they work is as much the fact that you're changing the diet up as anything else. It's not to say there aren't specific benefits to certain diets, and like keto diets have wonderful benefits as a protocol. You can even say the same about carnivore diets, but as a way to live, as a way to eat, you get into some serious issues. One example would be when you read the science papers, there's a lot of narrative that floats around today that is sort of like transmogrified into believing, or transmogrified into science, but it's really just narrative and story. But when you look at the actual science, you see real issues. Like, for example, one of the constraining factors that we had to get over as a species was protein toxicity. And until we got over that, we could not scale population. And the reason is simple. Protein in excessive amounts is toxic, okay, for a number of reasons. And so there's science papers on this looking at how did we as a species scale? How did we get over the problem of protein toxicity? And it goes by different names, salmon starvation, rabbit skinny, protein toxicity. There's all kinds of words for it, but it's the reality that too much protein in the diet ultimately is toxic, and you can't scale a civilization on that. So you've got to get to a point where you move to farming and you have this sort of like balance in the diet come in. So you remove this constraining factor of people dying because they're starving to death from too much protein, and so there's real science papers on this stuff. But all this just really speaks to is the fact that homeostasis governs how our body works. And you can disrupt that through inputs, and you can disrupt that through dietary things. And really easy to prove, tons of examples. And that's just how the body actually works. And, we can have fads that get away from that. Oh, fine, great. 5 years later, you got a Sibo problem. You'll come back to reality then, but that's just how things work.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that. So let's kind of dive into the gut microbiome a little. Why is it so important and influential on our overall body composition?
Well, there's a number of reasons why that's true. So you have to kind of begin with immunity, because really our ability to absorb nutrients and our ability to process matter, foreign matter through the body. That's what you're doing, is you're taking in foreign matter. And while it's in your body, you've still got foreign matter in your body that never becomes part of your body, and then it's passed out. So there's this selection process that has to happen. And so what you find is that antigen sensing within the gut is a really big deal. So we have these cells called dendritic cells or dendrites, and they are sort of antigen sensors. And so what you have is they are presented antigens from the gut lumen. And it turns out that very specific bacteria, like bifidobacteria, different strains of bifidobacteria, have a very powerful effect on host immunity because they work in concert with dendrite cells to create what are called PAMs, or essentially immune cascades, signal cascades that can be one direction or another. And so these can influence a number of things. One of the ways that the gut influences body composition is through what's called tissue translocation. And this is just really where you see immune cells from the gut, macrophages, and substances from the gut, like polysaccharide, can translocate through the gut barrier, get in the serum, wind up in body fat, and so they move around. And so what you see is that it's kind of like a virus in a sense. It's not a virus, but it's akin to the way a virus works, in the sense that you have a spreading of one thing from one place to another. And so what you see with the gut is that we can see inflammatory issues that really began in the gut. For example, translocation of lipopolysaccharide can get into your adipose mass. And then what that does is recruits macrophages into your adipose mass. Those macrophages create these, essentially long-term, they create these signal cascades that are inflammatory in nature. And then it changes the way that insulin works in your adipose mass because of the inflammatory signals. And then you become more prone to putting on body fat. And then this becomes a much bigger problem. And obesity has a lot of underlying causes, but that's absolutely one of them. Like pretty easy to establish too. Like you can take obese people and change the gut biome out, and give them Akkermansia and bifidobacteria, and they get lean. So it's not that hard to establish. Another mechanism is through ANGLP4, or fasting-induced adipose factor. And so this is an angioprotein, a protein related to the renin-angiotensin system, which regulates, mineral balance, salt fluid mineral balance. But in adipocytes, it also governs lipoprotein lipase. So what we find is that certain bacteria, like bifidobacteria, have a secretory effect on ANGLP4. And so what you see is that you are much less likely to store substrate as body fat, and more likely to burn it with certain bacteria, just based on crosstalk and interactions with very specific proteins. So, there's a number of ways this works. Akkermansia mucinilpha is another bacteria kind of sort of broke to the public at large in my book, and kind of seeing it everywhere now, which is cool, I guess. What you see with that, though, is that there's these very powerful correlations with Akkermansia mucinilpha and lean populations. It's not 100%, but the discrepancies aren't 100% linked to Akkermansia either. So, there's really compelling reasons to get on the train and understand that there probably is a lean enterotype. There's a lot of debate on that, but an enterotype is sort of a grouping of bacteria, and like a profile of bacteria. And there does seem to be quite a bit of correlation to having, certain bacteria present in lean and healthy people, and long-lived people too. So
I love all of that. So like, if there's one place somebody wants to start in order to make sure that they are protecting their gut microbiome or replenishing their gut microbiome, where should they start with this? Because I'm sure seems extremely overwhelming to somebody that's just getting started with their health journey.
Yeah, the thing that I put in my book were apple skins. So it's become kind of it's become a trope now where like you Google it and it's like Joel Greene apple skins, the apple skin guy. But essentially, it's certainly not simplistic. Like when you're dealing with like conditions and people that have conditions like acute, dysbiosis of the gut or Crohn's or things like that, this is maybe not the best place for them to start, just because at that point they cannot really handle fibers very well. But generally speaking, just to take an average person and improve the health of their gut, apple skins are probably a good choice for a number of reasons. So what you have is that there are phenolic compounds in the skins of the apple that there's three principal things about apple skins. There's apple pectin, there's solic acid, and then there's cyanidin-3 galactoside. And so all three of these compounds are potent mediators of a lot of different things. What you find is that the cyanidins in apple skins, they are huge, they're massive, and so they tend to ferment really well in the gut, and they tend to ferment the right kind of bacteria in the gut. So they, in all likelihood, help Akkermansia production, and that's a really good place to start, because Akkermansia is the principal mucin forager in the gut mucus layer. So it's the one that keeps the ocean of the gut kind of clean and healthy, and so that's a good place to start with that. And then the other thing that I put in my book were HMO, which are human milk oligosaccharides. And these are essentially long carbohydrates. 2-fucosyl lactose is the one that's on the market right now. And what these carbohydrates do is they act as decoys for different types of antigens and different types of things in the gut. And so they are very good at also feeding the right bacteria as well. And so you have this kind of combination of things that is healthy in most cases to help jumpstart the right sort of things in the gut. You need a healthy gut mucus layer, you need healthy populations. And so it's just simple, easy to do things that you can just make no other change, but just add into your diet. Apple skins is a good place to begin. Apple pectin is, pretty miraculous when you look at what it does. I mean, there's research showing that it probably removes radiation from the body. There's a lot of things. Cyanidin-3 galactoside is a cousin of cyanidin-3 glucoside. And there's just a host of benefits that you can look at from these phenolic compounds that involve things like helping with glucose metabolism to inflammation and all kinds of things. So they're pretty, as nutrient-wise, they're packed with quite a few goodies.
Awesome. Well, so let's kind of touch on that. You talked about it a little bit with the apple skins, but why is fiber an important part of a healthy gut microbiome?
Yeah, there could not be more stupidity on this topic floating around. I've heard some of the stupidest things. Like literally like irresponsible, stupid things on this topic, all the way up to there's really no need for fiber in the human body. And let me address that one. Anybody listening to this, let me kill that argument forever. Here's how we do it. Anybody that is in this industry that knows anything will tell you that it's very hard to get the FDA to allow you to make claims for things. Like to allow a claim, there has to be so much freaking evidence. It has to be so overwhelming that there isn't any debate about it. So there's only two claims the FDA allows for fiber. One of them is that it helps prevent cancer. Okay, that's like a pretty good reason for fiber in the diet. But mechanistically, here's what it really boils down to: is that we have different cells in the lining of the gut, and those cells differ depending on the area of the gut. So in the intestines, we have the enterocytes, and the colon, we have the colonocytes, and they have different nutrient needs. A lot, if not most, of digestion takes place in the colon. The primary fuel source in the colon is the short-chain fatty acid butyrate, which I basically kind of broke to the biohacking community back in 2016 on Carl Lenore's Superhuman Radio. And the thing to understand about butyrate is that it is essential. It's essential in the diet. Like you have to have butyrate in the diet. And the best way to get butyrate is through fermentation of fibers. That's the very best way. Now, it's not the only way. You can get it through different pathways, but all those pathways are not equal. When you study all those pathways and you look at, and the way you get it is, it's a bacterial metabolite. You get it from bacteria fermenting these fibers, and then one of their metabolic byproducts are these short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, acetate. So the ratios of these matter a lot, like the ratios that you get them in. Okay, that's one thing that really matters. But then the other sort of like the other things in the mix matter a lot, like the levels of antioxidants, the kinds of antioxidants, and the salvage pathways and all that stuff. So when you're making butyrate from fiber, you have a salvage pathway that ensures that the ratios of acetate to butyrate that you get are sort of ideal. And I've heard these ridiculous arguments like, well, there's other short chain fatty acids that matter. Okay, that's kind of like saying there's other fluids in your car other than oil that matter.
Great analogy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's other fluids. Yeah. They're not all equal. So yeah. So you can make butyrate through proteins. You can ferment it through proteins through a couple of different pathways. The lysine pathway being one, or the ketogenic pathway. It's not optimal long term to do that with. So there really is a biomechanical basis for the production of butyrate from fibers in the diet, like, excuse me, not biochemical. There's a really strong biochemical basis for producing butyrate from fibers in the diet, and that it's optimal. And it doesn't mean that we can't have variety in the diet. We certainly need variety. So we certainly need periods where, we're changing things up in the diet, and we're, maybe eating more protein for a period of a few months, and then maybe leaning back to fibers. And what that does is it mimics availability and seasonality that we had ancestrally. So ancestrally, you didn't have a refrigerator. It wasn't stocked with food, steak. You didn't have a way to freeze a year's supply of meat. We didn't have that. What we had was availability and starvation and variability in the diet. And when you have those things in the diet, you are mimicking seasonality, and the too much of any one thing typically in the diet you'll get an allergy to it. It's super easy to prove. Like just do too much of any one thing, and over time you'll find some allergy somewhere in most cases. So we need variety in the diet. And so, we can certainly mix up like fibers with, other things and seasons of different things, but as an ideal way to get the gut fed what it needs, you need the right fuel. It's butyrate. The best way to make it is through fibers. And that just is easy to prove biochemically. So
I love that. So I want to kind of dive into that. Can you go a little further into what butyrate is responsible for and why it is one of the more important ones?
Yeah. So again, so the primary thing to understand is that the colonocytes in the gut, the gut is the physics of the gut lining are flipped from the rest of the body. So the gut exists in a hypoxic environment. So you have high hypoxia, okay? And the short chain, or the macrophages, the sentinel immune cells in the gut, they are adapted to live in that environment. And normally in other parts of the body where you have hypoxia going off for sustained periods, that's going to set off an inflammatory firestorm of issues. You're going to see interleukin 1B, interleukin 6, going off, and you're going to have big inflammation problems. But that's not true in the lining of the gut. In the lining of the gut, it's strongly oxidizing in its very nature. So you have a highly oxidizing environment in there, highly hypoxic. And so when you look at different fuel sources that can feed those cells in there, what you see is that butyrate is sort of optimal to do that with, because it maintains the colonic environment, it maintains the right pH. You get kind of what you need to feed the colonocytes. And it has a very pro health signal cascade effect. So what you see with butyrate is that you get suppression of interleukin 6, increased production of interleukin 10 and other interleukins, which tend to keep the gut junctions very tight, seals the gut. It also initiates HDAC inhibition in the gut. And what you see is that in terms of signal pathways, you see, in other words, HDAC inhibition is just a big word that means that we can transcribe DNA and read it accurately and get DNA to open up where it's readable. So butyrate makes that possible in the gut. It's a class 3 HDAC inhibitor. You can feed the colonocytes with other fuels, for example, glucose. The problem with that is that over time, you're going to really damage the gut lumen, the gut environment from doing that. What you're going to see is an increase in tumor necrosis factor alpha. You're going to see an increase in the production of oxygen in the gut where it's not supposed to be, like in the colonic environment. And so butyrate as a fuel source, it's anti-oncogenic, anti-cancer, promotes the right pH, does all these like really great things that we needed to do. And probably most interesting of all is that it seems to facilitate a lot of crosstalk between the microbiome and the mitochondria. When the colonocytes are using other fuels like glucose, they're over time going to produce more tumor necrosis factor alpha. Well, tumor necrosis factor alpha can impair butyrate transport. And so you have this kind of like, when we use backup fuels, the poor get poorer kind of scenario. So that's kind of like an overview of butyrate, but it's involved in just a lot of things that are essential for longevity, for health, and for the optimal function of the gut. And there's no getting around it. And that's just how things work.
Now, because butyrate is so important, I know I just was speaking with a client about it the other day, actually. So when you said that, I was like, oh, yay, cool. We're going to talk about this. But because it's so important, what are some great ways to stimulate the production of via foods or practices, or what do you suggest people do in order to make sure that their butyrate production is quality?
Yeah, so the thing I talk about most kind of in the immunity code is that you can really kind of make it simple. The body's never simple, but in terms of what should we target, luckily there are some simple things. And one of them is feeding the Phytobacteria species through crosstalk reactions. You will create the fuel needed for butyrate. And so these are, foods like dark fruits that are rich in polyphenols. These are things like, grains that are rich in beta glucan, fibers that are rich in cellulose, hemicellulose, garbanzo beans, green beans, things like that. And you don't have to overdo it. Like what I see a lot of these days is people like hear this and like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go eat a pound of those things, and they have, bloating and gas. So you have to understand that the way the gut spins up new species is through fermentation. Fermentation means you're making gas. Okay. The way to get from point A to point B with the gut is in this era that we're in, where everyone has overconsumed and overdone everything, and you have all kinds of bacteria in the wrong place in the gut, is to just slowly introduce little amounts of things into your diet. So you can introduce like just literally this much of garbanzo beans, this much asparagus, just some dark polyphenol fruits, raspberries, pomegranate, blueberries, these things, just in small amounts, and just slowly begin to titrate up the species in the gut. And then if you'll take it slow like that, and then what you're doing is you're beginning to feed the Phytobacteria species. You're beginning to feed the species that create the crosstalk needed to make butyrate in the gut. And that's like a simple way to do it.
I love that. So I love that you're saying too, that it doesn't need to be a ton. It can just be a small amount, just like a little teeny tiny in your hand amount, which is really a great way to put things into perspective. Because I mean, if a little is okay, a lot is always better, is a lot of the common thoughts when it revolves around things like this. And it's just not true.
No, yeah, no. It used to be like it probably like about 6-7 years ago, before the epidemic of Sibo, you could do that. You could just go do this and do a bunch of stuff. But it's not so much true anymore, just because gut issues are so widespread and prevalent from overconsumption of probiotics and extreme diets. So you have to really titrate up and start small now.
I love that. So you've brought up your book, The Immunity Code, a couple of times. Where can people find that? And then also, what else does it talk about that is so important with our health?
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it direct from us at beatnutrition.com. And if you go there, also, we have the immune-centric fat loss course, which is based on the book. But yeah, and speaking of that, yeah, so I would mention, I spent about 4 chapters in the book on fat loss because it's such an important topic, not for the reasons that we have previously adhered to, which was, to look jacked and, get dates, all that. It's a fantastically important topic from an aging point of view, because when you look at body fat and when you look at what it does and what happens over time, it really becomes kind of a critical mediator in how well you age. It really has a lot of say in the matter of the rate of aging. And so having a lot of body fat and having a lot of inflamed fat is a vector that accelerates and magnifies how fast you're going to age. And you'll notice it first really in terms of just creaks and things and aches in the joints. And it's all stemming from body fat. So the thing with that I really talk a lot about in the book is that if you want an outcome, a long-term outcome, you're not going to get it unless you deal with what's true over time, what happens, what really happens, not this BS we give ourselves of, here's the pic of me in my best shape ever. And I'm like that all the time, because that's not reality. And you have to deal with the mechanisms that are true. And so there is a set of mechanisms inherent to adipose fat, to your fat cells, that has never, ever been inventoried, ever. And they drive the picture long-term. And it has to do with the what's called mechanobiology, weight regain. And there is a type of biology at work here that's not been talked about. It's mechanical in nature. And a lot of it has to do with how mechanical tensioning influences the way that fat cells store fat, lose fat, and regain fat when they lose it. And so you have all these sort of forces and all these physics going on here related to the dynamics between the fat cell and the surrounding exoskeleton called the ECM. And there are, the best way to think of it is to think of like your engine in your car, and it has engine mounts that mount it to the chassis. So the car is akin to the extracellular matrix, and the engine is akin to the fat cell. And what you have are these shock absorbers and these tensioning bolts that kind of take up the tension between, the engine and the frame. Your fat cells have something very similar. They have very specific proteins like vinculin and these tensioning bolt kind of proteins that measure torsion stress, traction stress between fat cells and the ECM, and transmit this data as signal into the fat cell. And so what we see is that when the fat cell shrinks, there's a pulling away from the ECM, a change in tension, and there are probabilistic outcomes when you do that. The highest probabilistic outcome is weight regain because of the forces in play. And if you just think about it for a second and get out of the schlock of, oh, hey guys, this is the way. If you just get out of that, what you'll see is that serves a survival benefit, because the act of like shrinking fat cells directly threatens survival from an ancestral point of view. Like you don't really want to have too much of that going on, because if you don't have any fat, you're not going to survive when there's no gain, right? So the body has protections. It has mechanisms in place that are very old and very good at compensating for reductions in fat cell mass. And the most likely outcome is they refill the fat. But there's a bigger part to the story, and it's that over time, there's an accrued or accumulated effect, an accumulated cost that happens. And in the research, you see it described as stiffening of the ECM. We see it clearly in obesity, and now there's emerging research that strongly suggests probably see the same thing with yo-yo dieting and repeated cycles of weight gain and fat loss. You hear this a lot anecdotally when you talk to bodybuilders, as they get in their late 40s, it's like, it's really hard to drop the fat now. Man, really hard. It used to be easier. And we blame that on metabolism, blame it on all these other things. That's not to say those things aren't players in the play, but there's another player, and it's these things I'm speaking to that have never really been accounted for. So, it brings us to a rethink of this whole thing. Like, whoa, wait a second. And what it brings us to is that the weight reduced state is the most critical aspect of fat loss, meaning once you're lean, once you look good, that's actually the most critical part, because you've got a period of about 4 months to a year where there's a stabilization effect going on. And there are specific quantifiable, measurable things going on. There are specific genes, specific proteins, specific collagen fibers, all of these things that are happening in the weight reduced state. And how that goes will determine whether or not the story of the road, goes back towards weight regain, or you maintain. So that's kind of the thing.
I love it. That's so great and so well explained. So I do really appreciate that. Let's talk about Veep and what you're doing with that.
Not much right now. It's the interface was getting super old. The protocols are fantastic, but the interface it was built back in 2009 in need of a serious update. So I pulled it off, and we're doing an interface update for about 6 months, which at the same time I launched the immune-centric fat loss course, which is the most advanced thing I think that's out there, because it's dealing with the weight reduced state. And so that's kind of the frontline solution that I have right now. And Veep will be coming back probably in about programming hours, probably in about 6 months, I would guess. So yeah, and it'll be a core part of the maintenance phase for people.
Awesome. I love that. Well, if my listeners want to find you, look a little more into what you are doing, how do they go about doing that?
You can go to my Instagram. That's at Real Joel Greene. And then Veep Nutrition, you can go there, and that's kind of where you'll find me right now. But I'm looking to viralize myself.
Well, perfect. So I'll put all of that in the show notes. If you could leave my listeners with one piece of advice, what would it be?
You have a missing foundation. If you built the best looking nightclub ever on the beach, on the sand, and you didn't put a foundation in, it'd be like the best party. Everybody wants to be at that party. Whoa, this place is banging. It's great, right? And then the first storm that comes along will wash that whole thing away. Okay. Well, that's what happens in real life to most people, is they allocate a bunch of time to looking good, and they get in shape. They look their best ever. And then the storms of life come along and wash their fitness plans right off the calendar, okay? Right into the sea. And during those periods when you're bobbling and you're trying to get up for air, you need a foundation that has never really been talked about. You need a foundation that doesn't depend on inputs of time to keep you from aging, to minimize weight gain, to minimize inflammation, and all these other things. And so there's a foundation that's been missing, and it really comes down to adding in something similar to your toothbrush time. No matter what, you're going to brush your teeth every day. You're going to brush your teeth every day, no matter what. Even if you don't have time, you'll brush your teeth. So it really comes down to finding something similar, about 2 minutes a day, where there is a bang for the buck accounting of the things that take the least time and have the most impact on the body over time. And that's the essence of the immune-centric approach. So the immune-centric approach is that we look at the things that matter most. We look at circulation, oxygenation, energy production, mobility, flexibility. We look at things that really, the things that you lose that are the foundation. And then once you've lost those things, you can't do the other things. You can't go to the gym. You don't have the energy. You don't have the flexibility. You don't have the knees. And so that's really the foundation that's missing. And that is more important than anything else.
I love it. Well, I certainly appreciate you spending your time with me today. I think you put some wonderful pieces of knowledge out there, and I thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. It was great to be here.
Thank you.